Jonah's world is perfect. Everything is under control. There's no war or fear of pain. There are no choices. Every person is assigned a role in the community, and Jonas lives in a seemingly ideal world. When Jonas turns 12, he is singled out to receive special training from the Giver. The Giver alone holds the memories of the true pain and pleasure of life. Not until he is given his life assignment as the receiver does Jonas begin to understand the dark secrets behind this fragile community. Now it is time for Jonas to receive the truth, and there is no turning back. The Giver by Lois Lowry.
Hi, I'm Kayla.
And I'm Jessica. And this is the YA Sisterhood.
We think that YA books deserve more analytical discussion, and we are here to provide that service.
That's what we do. We are discussers of
everything. We don't shut up.
No, I love the sound of my own voice. That's why we have a podcast.
It's true. She listens to it while she sleeps. So today we're discussing The Giver. I was really, really excited to do this book. This is a book that was so formative for me when I was a teenager. I read it and it kind of blew my mind. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking about it for long periods of time afterwards.
Yeah.
So I was really excited to be able to revisit this book and discuss it as an adult.
I have never read this book. So this is really fresh for me.
We don't have our recollections for this one, what we remember about it or thought it might be. We can't find the file. Sorry.
Life's that way sometimes. But we basically just gave you the Cliff Notes version of what we said anyway, which is Kayla loved it. I never read it. This is exciting.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
this book it follows Jonas, and he is a young boy. He's 11 years old, and he is about to become a 12-year-old. 12-year-olds are assigned a job. And it's not necessarily like lottery style, like City of Ember or something like that, where you're just like, here's a job. Doesn't matter if you're good at it. Mm-hmm. In this society, all of the elders observe you and see what your aptitudes are and what they think that you would fit in with. And they give you a job based on that, which is a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah. Sort of makes me think of like arranged marriages.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. They do those too in this society.
They do.
So he turns 12 and he becomes the receiver. And he doesn't even really know what this means.
The receiver of memory. It's a full title.
Yeah. And it is the most honored position in the entire community that he is a part of. And, we kind of get a little bit of world building, but essentially he goes and he meets the receiver
the old receiver.
Yeah. Who is now the Giver. Title drop. And he essentially gives Jonas all of the memories of everything past. He is like the scholar of this society, except he's able to implant those memories directly into your brain, like visions. He has tons of books, and, Jonas learns he's allowed to break all the rules of being polite and ask questions. And
he's allowed to lie for the
first time ever. And he has different rules from everyone else in his community. And he is then sort of isolated by the knowledge that he gains. He has to go and learn all of these new things that he has never experienced before. And the book does a really good job, I think, of this, which we'll get into later. But essentially, Jonas learns about color, about joy, about loneliness, about pain. He learns all about these things that he's sort of been
blind to.
Yeah, blind to for his entire life. And not in the I was a young child, I didn't know these things, but everyone in his society is cut off from these
sensations of life because they can't have access to ancestral memory.
And they all, long time ago, chose sameness as a way to avoid pain and to be safe and comfortable. And therefore, they don't experience these feelings. They don't experience these experiences. He starts to learn these things, and he thinks that people should know it. His father, shortly before he becomes 12, takes in a young child. His father works as a nurturer, or essentially someone who takes care of young children. Babies, yeah. Like a nursery person. Yeah, well, until they're like 1. There's a child or a baby at the center where he works that is not doing well and isn't growing properly. So he brings it home, and they're taking care of it throughout the background of the story. and it's getting stronger. It'll sleep when it's in Jonas's room, but nowhere else really. And as he learns more, he learns that there was a giver before that failed epically.
I'm not sure I would put it that way.
Not really, but that's how everyone else sees it.
Yeah.
Is kind of where I was going with that, is everyone else sees it as this big epic fail of the receiver before him. And kind of the giver as well, I think, is the implication. He learns all these things, and he thinks that people should know it, and he's discussing it with the giver, who seems to be on the same page, but doesn't really know how to do so. And they essentially, after a series of events, decide that Jonas is going to leave the community. And when he leaves, all of the memories that he has taken in will be released
back into society,
onto the people. And the giver says that he's going to stay behind to help them deal with the aftermath. And they have this big elaborate plan. And then Jonas finds out that the child that is staying with his father is going to be, quote unquote, released. And in the context of this story, being released is essentially euthanized.
Euthanized, yeah. You're killed.
And they don't understand the complexity of that and the horror of that. And he does, now that he's gotten these memories. And so he abandons the plan. He kidnaps the baby and he leaves. And essentially, that's the book. Do you think I missed any big points?
I don't think so.
It's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, it's a pretty basic plot. It's, allegory of the cave.
But in that really simple plot, there's so much packed in.
Oh, yeah. No, this book is dense.
And the author is just masterful in the way that she handles it.
Speaking of, I didn't do as much research on her in this book as we have in previous books on the authors. Mm-hmm. But what research I have done, it made me very interested in her. I know you sort of felt the same way. Mm-hmm. She seems like a very interesting person.
She does.
She kind of reminds me of like how I feel about someone like S.E. Hinton. It's like I've never been that curious about S.E. Hinton's personal life, for example, just because I'm way more interested in the books. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I was interested in her personal life because the more I learned about her, the more I learned that her books are very deeply personal. Yeah. And I thought that really shows when you learn about her. And I know you're kind of a big fan of Death of the Author, but...
Well, I don't know about big fan of Death of the Author, but I think any art piece, if you're going to critique it to find value in it, you should look at it both ways.
I agree.
Like a piece has on its own without context might be all that remains of a work of art in 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. So you need to value it on that metric, but you also need to evaluate it in our current modern day context. And we do know who the author is. So.
Yeah. And that's why I like to research it after I've read it.
Yeah.
But it's really important to me, I think partly because I write, is I like knowing where the story came from and learning a little bit more about the author. And I like connecting what I've read with the person that wrote it. And so I like reading it to see if it stands on its own. And if it's something I enjoy or something that I'm discussing, I like to go back and read about it. I do want to mention her dedication of the book.
Yes.
Really struck me before we kind of talk about her anymore. Her dedication is for all of the children to whom we entrust the future. And I just thought that was awesome because this is a book for young adults, mm-hmm. and she knows her audience very clearly. She knows her audience. She knows what she's doing. And, the story is kind of set up like these people are in a really regimented society, but it's relaxed.
Utopian.
Yeah.
But
she actually grew up in sort of like military type bases in different areas. And so she really, and I didn't know that when I read the book, I could definitely see it going back. Yeah. And there are a couple instances where kind of looking at her history, really what she was writing and going through personally when she thought of it.
Absolutely. There was one quote I saw where she referenced, it wasn't in this book, in The Giver, but she was referencing the sequel to this book.
One of the sequels.
One of the sequels to this book as part of a quadrology? What do you call it? A fourology?
Quartet?
Yes, it's a quartet. That's correct.
You were an orchestra.
I know.
As was I. You should know this.
Nah.
Words are hard.
They are.
Anyway, as one of the quartet.
As one of the books in the series, she talked about her main character was a person whose job was to give birth. And the way she talked about this character and how she found herself in this character and kind of used this character for a cathartic purpose in her literature, I thought that made it really interesting. I'm actually really interested to read the next book.
I really liked looking up the author because I felt like you could see how much love she poured into it.
Yeah.
Going back and reading like anything about her, you could see how much she put into this book. It was very highly personal for her, I think.
And it feels personal. It feels like a personal book.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I was even going to go back to one of the first ways that we even talk about the society being idyllic is how she drops this sort of theme of invasiveness into the book. Where, and this was the first thing that struck me, I was like, maybe I'm not reading a utopian society here.
Yeah.
Because their their evening conversation, they talk about their feelings every day. And that's a very soft way of breaking how invasive the family relationships are in this book.
I agree.
It made me so uncomfortable the next morning in this book when now they had to describe their dreams. And it wasn't just, this is a family doing something healthy together. It was, this is something everybody does because it's the rules.
But I loved that aspect of it because when you first start reading it, it does sound
idyllic.
Good, kind of idyllic, and kind of like, oh, they share their feelings, and that's what they're supposed to do, and like that's part of the society, that it's encouraged. And then he says, you can't not share your feelings.
Yep.
And I thought, who?
Yeah.
Ooh, don't like that.
Yeah.
But she definitely, in this book and others I've read by her, and I hate to bring up other books, but others I've read by her, she definitely explores, I think, the importance of connecting with other people. And I think that was really important in this book. I think it came up several times, the importance of
not being lonely, like of trying to build those connections with the people around you. Loneliness comes up like even very explicitly in the book several times with the giver especially. But even Jonas talks about his sort of profound loneliness when he starts understanding what love means and the people around him don't understand.
Yeah.
And understanding what pain is and war is. And Asher just gets mad that Jonas ruined his game when he has a PTSD flashback.
Well, and he even says, he's like, please don't play this game after his friend apologized, and his friend just blows him off and is like, I apologize. Those are the polite rules. You're supposed to accept my apology and move on. And we're not going to discuss this is kind of, we're not supposed to discuss this. I apologized. I said what I wanted to say and I apologized and now we're done. And that's kind of the feeling I got from that. But just in that, like, the feeling of loneliness that comes up multiple times, and even the concept of loneliness as pain, which, I mean, a lot of people have explored, but I think she did a good job of when she talks about the previous receiver and how the giver, who cared for her deeply like a daughter, was afraid to make her experience pain. So instead of giving her physical pain, he gave her
emotional pain,
loneliness, and other emotional pain. But loneliness is the first one he mentioned. And I remember thinking, I bet he gave her loneliness before we even got to that aspect of it. And I read it a long time ago, so I didn't remember that aspect. But I just knew in my heart of hearts that that's what he gave her. And to me, that felt really poignant because...
And very thematically consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, very thematically consistent. And we learn, that she... I didn't put this in the plot part, but the previous receiver actually asks to be released.
Yeah. She functionally requests to be euthanized because she cannot handle the rigors of her job.
Yeah, of taking on these memories.
And so when Jonas finally is chosen to be receiver, a new rule by the time he's chosen has been added that you cannot ask for release if you are a receiver. So you cannot beg for death anymore.
And the other thing is, this is the only one person has this position. He's alone in this position.
Yeah.
There is no other, he doesn't have coworkers that do this too. Which I think is, being alone, being cast out by this.
The fear too. Like, once the giver has given away his memories, he won't even have that friend anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a very profound sort of loneliness, I think.
And the connection that he and the giver make throughout the story, I think, is also really... Because at one point he asks his parents, do you love me? Because he finally understands sort of the concept of love.
Yeah.
And he just asked his parents, he's like, do you love me? And they laugh. And they're like, that's such a broad term. We enjoy you. And to them, that's nice.
Yeah.
But to him, that's
horrifying.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. Like to know that the people around you not only don't love you, but can't even conceive of what that would mean.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, that's kind of the overarching theme to me is connecting with other people. And on top of it, I think, too, a sense of, I don't know if this would necessarily be her theme, but she definitely kind of has an underlying theme of the importance of balance, I think.
You're going to have to argue that one.
Oh, well, maybe not.
I don't want to argue.
I don't want to argue. I just want to say what I want and leave. So Jonas is our main character, and he is kind of... I like Jonas.
I do too.
He's a very likable character, and he's good, but not... They don't continue to say he's good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they show it through his actions, like his willingness...
He obviously cares about the people in his community.
Yeah.
It's important to him to be a healthy part of a unit and to do his part. And that's the only thing, like that same love of community is what drives him and the giver to do what they do.
Yeah, like it's not selfishness that drives him to do this.
No.
Though I do think they will...
Jonas wants to punish them a little bit, I think.
I think a little bit. Towards the end he does. Mm-hmm. But I think in his heart he knows that it's not their fault. And that it is for their own good. And he, even in his willingness to take more painful memories from the receiver, from the giver, because he knows that the giver is in pain. Mm-hmm. And even that shows to me, like, Jonas has a really good, like, solid character. Yeah,
the kid's got moxie.
Yeah.
I like watching his relationship with Gabe change over the course of the story as well.
Yeah, because he's kind of indifferent to Gabe at first.
Yeah, he kind of doesn't like Gabe at first because Gabe reminds him of himself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Gabe is the baby that they take in.
Yes. Gabriel they're not supposed to have names until they're given to their parents, but Jonas's father sort of snuck the name of the baby so they wouldn't be calling a baby by a number when he came home.
And yeah, he doesn't like Gabe at first because Gabe reminds him of him. I agree. Mm-hmm. I think that's a lot of what it is. And he doesn't really seem interested in babies.
Yeah.
Like, he's just kind of like meh. Whereas his little sister and his dad are very into the baby and, like, love that aspect of having the baby around. And he's just kind of like, the baby's here. And don't really care.
Yeah.
Asher is really interesting to me as well.
Me too.
I really liked Asher's character.
Asher is Jonas's lifelong best friend. He's hyperactive. He's imprecise with language. He's basically the archetype of the best friend who kind of grows up in your shadow and then gets a better position and grows to hate you in, like, cartoon plots.
I don't know. I don't know that
he doesn't grow to hate Jonas, but he definitely grows to mistrust him, I would say.
And I don't know that that's entirely because he grew up in Jonas's shadow, so much as because everyone seems really wary of the receiver of memory because he's different. And they're not really supposed to call out differences in this society. They're supposed to be...
They're supposed to just shame differences through, like...
casual ignoring. You're not supposed to talk about it, but you're not supposed to be different.
The idea is to assimilate, for sure.
And the receiver of memory is supposed to kind of be different. They can't really be the same because once you've taken in these memories and these experiences, you can't really be like everybody else anymore.
No, absolutely not.
And because of that, he already feels set apart right away. But because of that, and because it's so revered, people don't know how to treat him. And Asher definitely falls into that category. And I think to an extent resents him a little bit. Not because of the positions that either of them got, but because he changed. I think that's why he resents him.
But that's the same reason that the cartoon best friend resents the hero.
All right, yeah, I'll give you that.
That's, standard fare there. Yeah, I think Fiona didn't really get dug into enough on her own as a character.
I think she was just pretty.
Yeah, she was just the pretty girl Jonas had a crush on.
Kind of, yeah.
Sure. I mean, she gets some fleshed outness.
Yeah. But overall, she's not really there to be a part of the story.
She's a bit of a lamp person.
The other character that I really loved and really just wanted to learn more. Well, there were a couple that I really wanted to learn more about, but the giver himself was fascinating to me. He was so kind and so sad. And I thought he was really well fleshed out. We were given time to understand that he's kind of gruff and rude at the beginning, but not out of rudeness so much as he doesn't have to follow the rules of being polite. And he's by himself most of the time because of these differences that he carries. The way he grows to love Jonas and the way that he talks about Rosemary, the previous receiver that released herself.
Yeah, she straight did too.
Yeah.
She just injected her own syringe. Yeah,
she just decided to release herself. And, he loved her and he thinks of her as a daughter. And Jonas as well, as soon as the topic of love comes up and he sees Jonas wondering, do my parents love me, or the concept of love, he immediately steps in as like, I love you. And I thought that was really powerful as well, because he knows, A, that Jonas has never felt that from someone before, but also that it would be lonely to discover that people don't feel that after you know what it is.
That would be heartbreaking for sure.
And he does a really good job, in my opinion, in the book of allowing Jonas to explore at his own pace in this really rigorous job where you have to take on pain that you've never experienced before and joy that you've never experienced before. And both can be exhausting. I thought he was a really
extremely compelling.
Yeah.
It's not the way mentor characters are usually written in my experience. He was certainly, we spent a lot of time with him, but we didn't really spend any time getting to know him as a character. But I still feel like he was very well fleshed out throughout the story. And I believed that Jonas and the giver had built a relationship with one another.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is all of the characters felt, even though they were supposed to be sameness, they all felt really distinct. I thought she did a really good job of kind of showing that these are all people who are quote unquote the same. These are all very similar people who follow these same rules and try to be as similar as possible, but they are all individual.
They try to use their individuality as strengths within the society instead of seeing them as reasons to hurt one another.
And they all felt like they had their own color to them, I guess, or their own, I hate to use the word color because we're going to talk about that in a minute, but
they certainly all had their own personalities and they were all very individual.
Yes.
I enjoyed that aspect of it, that everybody felt really fleshed out and felt like a real person. The mom felt really real to me. Like her sex talk with Jonas was just very real. That was visceral.
And, and that's another thing. The dialogue I thought was very
authentic.
Yeah. It felt real, even though the situation wasn't real. And it was, a lot of it was scripted almost. Like, these are the words we're supposed to say, so we're going to say them. But even in that, she did a really good job of conveying what was going on and trusting her young audience to figure out the subtext.
Yes. It's not super subtexty, but yeah, it is subtext.
But the moments that are, she trusts her audience to figure it out. Like when I was talking about Asher and Jonas have an argument, and Asher pretty much gets mad at Jonas for ruining the game because Jonas realized that guns are bad and that war happened, and he sort of has a flashback of one of the memories that has been given to him while his friends are playing like a shooter game, and he ruins the game, and Asher gets mad at him and kind of blows off on him and is like, why'd you do this? And Jonas is like, this is why. And Asher's like, I'm sorry, I didn't respect you like I should have. And Jonas doesn't immediately accept his apology as the script is written, which is, I accept your apology, Asher, and then move on. He continues the conversation, and Asher becomes irritated. Yeah. He becomes irritated that Jonas isn't following the script, and he's like, I apologized. And he's like, okay, I accept your apology, Asher. And he has to let it go because
he doesn't want to lose his friend completely.
Yeah, and because that's what you're supposed to do, and he understands that Asher doesn't get why he's upset, and he never will. But the subtext within that conversation I thought was really powerful too, of Asher being like, dude, not following the way things are supposed to be. I don't want to like...
Also, what a mood.
Yeah. I apologize, man.
Come on.
So I really thought that was she trusts her audience.
I agree. So one character I really wanted to discuss a lot was the character of the father, whose name I don't think we ever learned.
No, their dad and
mom. Father and mother, yeah. The character of father is a nurturer, basically a neonatal nurse. His job is to make sure that babies are developing correctly. And he's a very soft, very patient, very caring man. As we were demonstrated throughout the whole book that he is nurturing. He has a nurturing personality. Yes. He loves babies. And the moment when Jonas realizes what being released means, he discovers it because one of the birth mothers gave birth to identical twins. And in this universe, if you have identical twins, you don't get to keep both of them.
Well, you don't get to keep any of them.
No. But the community doesn't get to keep both of them. One of the babies will be released. And Jonas talks to the giver about what that means. And the giver says, well, you're the receiver now. You can ask for anything you want out of the community, and they have to provide it for you. So we're going to get a video of your father doing the release this morning so you can see how it goes. And he discovers that his father, in a very, very dark scene, quite happily kills a baby with lethal injection and lets its little baby corpse lie there while he cleans up the rest of the operating area.
And then he throws it in a box and puts it down a trash chute.
And is whistling a happy tune the whole time. Like, he's fine with the whole situation. And it was horrifying to read. This character I'd come to really enjoy and like a lot. Just immediately transform into something different because of the context.
Sinister, yeah.
Well, and the whole point is that it's because of the context we have as people who have feelings about death, and he doesn't understand, and that's something the giver tries to explain to Jonas.
Yeah, he doesn't get it.
These people don't get it. Your buddy Fiona, the one working with old people, Jonas says, I should tell her what's happening, and the giver says she probably already knows. She's probably already learned how to do it.
And they don't realize that death is sad.
Yeah, they celebrate it when the olds get released. They have a big party before the olds
And they're sad when the babies get released, but they don't, like at the beginning of the book, someone accidentally flies over the city and he panics because he got the wrong coordinates. So he flies back over the city, which is against the rules, and they say he'll be released.
Yeah.
He made a huge mistake at work.
If you're an adult who's released, it's a massive embarrassment.
And the fact that that's a punishment for messing up at work, like, oh, well, they're ineffective, they're going to die. But they don't think of it that way. They think of it as they're just going somewhere else, and they don't fear death. They don't, like, when a child dies, in the past a child had an accident and died, they're sad that they lost the child, but they don't think of it as that child died. They lost him, so they just replace him and give another kid the same name.
Pretty much.
Because they don't think of life as an individual thing that can be lost.
It's a collective community.
And so Jonas is horrified, and we as the readers are horrified. It's sickening. But Jonas's dad doesn't think it's sickening because to him, this is just his job, and
that baby
felt no pain, and
there
was no sadness in it going.
Mm-hmm. It was just the baby was supposed to be the twin that weighed less is the one they had to get rid of, so that's the one they got rid of. And that's what he did. And it was just such a jarring way for our character to lose his innocence and for us as the readers to lose it along with him.
But I love that she does it that way. And she does such a good job of juxtaposing these moments.
Where he didn't lose his innocence watching war or seeing pain or experiencing pain. He lost his innocence because his dad is not the man that he thought.
Yeah.
And I feel that.
Well, and on top of that, I mean, I don't think he would have understood had he not experienced those other memories first.
Correct.
He wouldn't have thought, oh, this is horrifying. But now that he's seen war and death and pain, he knows what it means. He knows the context, the significance
of loss.
And his dad doesn't. And so for him, that's horrifying. And for his dad, it's just another day at work. But yeah, it was so well juxtaposed, like him whistling while he did this and sort of just being like, whatever, like having a good day. And she does such a good job of like that sort of surreal horror of it.
Yeah, it was pretty horrifying. And Equally horrifying is the incredibly invasive conversation that we have with Jonas's mom about his stirrings. So you share your dreams every morning in this society with your whole family. You don't lie. You're trained from birth not to lie. At like a week or two before he turns 12 and is given his assignment, he has his first sex dream.
Well, it's not really a sex dream. It's a sort of a prelude
Yeah.
to a sex dream. He knows he wants something.
Yeah, he just doesn't understand what.
Or why.
He doesn't get it, but he enjoyed the dream and doesn't understand why.
And he's embarrassed.
And he's embarrassed and he doesn't understand why.
But he has to share.
Exactly. So there's just this really icky moment where he shares his proto-sex dream with his entire family at the table, and his dad just packs up his little sister, asks for her help to take the baby to work, and the mom stays and sits down and says, so you've had your first stirrings, you're gonna have to start taking a pill now. And Jonas is a little excited initially because Asher takes a pill every day. And now he's like part of that club of people who take a pill every day. He doesn't find it creepy until later when he understands why he was supposed to take the pill to begin with, and he stops taking it.
Yeah. It's supposed to repress you. It's supposed to kind of put you under. It
represses your sex drive.
Yeah.
Because people aren't supposed to breed willy-nilly in the society.
They don't breed at all, really.
Yeah.
Like, you're assigned a child, you're assigned a spouse. I love that in the story, everything is sort of set up for you, and it's done in a way that makes it feel good.
Yeah. Everybody's job is respectable. Everybody is...
Well, not everybody.
Well, not everybody's job is respectable, but even the less respectable jobs are still... Honored. Because they all serve a purpose for the community.
Mm-hmm.
Like the birth mothers. They're not very well respected.
But they're important.
But they're important because they're the people assigned to give birth to all the babies. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. And, his mom, I liked the little fact that his mom was a judge and his dad was the nurturer and not the other way around. It wasn't like a huge thing, but it was just, I just enjoyed that aspect of it, that it was kind of...
The jobs were very ungendered. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Like you were suited to a job. Your gender wasn't as... there were some interesting gender things that did happen in the book. Though.
Yes, like the kids had to wear braids until a certain age with ribbons, and like...
There were very distinct markers for different genders, and they referred to each other as male and female.
Yeah. Which
was interesting and weirdly clinical. But I wonder if that was just a language choice to make it feel more clinical.
I think it was.
Because it felt weird.
And that was one thing that, like, I really liked that aspect that they're assigned these jobs out of, what the elders think they'll be good at, because a lot of this book is kind of a dystopia, but it's not. And the thing that I liked about it was I had a really easy time with suspension of disbelief in this book, because I could see the logical conclusion of how they got to everything they got to.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, when the big underlying question, a theme we didn't really discuss before, is the theme of choice.
Yeah.
And the importance of choice. And is it really that important to have a choice, or is it more important to look out for the good of the community?
And be comfortable and safe.
Well, not just comfortable and safe, but just, is it more important to be concerned with the good of the community or the good of the individual? And that's a big part of the bubble wrapped into that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because, like, a lot of the things in this sort of dystopian society are things that are just taken to the extreme, such as, the whole sharing your feelings. Like, the idea of that was really cool to me, that, families are encouraged to sit and share their feelings at the end of the day and discuss them and work through them. But then as you dig deeper, it's a rule. You have to share your feelings. You can't
it's
not share
something
your
you're
feelings.
supposed to do. It's not something they're doing because they have a healthy relationship as a family. It's something that they are doing
to keep tabs on each other.
Exactly. It's kind of icky.
But they don't think of it that way.
No, they think of it as helping each other improve and be better people. Mm-hmm. It makes me think of that Madeleine L'Engle book, Wrinkle in Time. There was a world that the main character had to go to where everybody was forced to be identical in this universe by the bad guy. And you get this scene of like this kid who wasn't bouncing the ball right because he was having fun, and he's like being forced to bounce the ball in time. This is a lot less like heavy-handed version of that same thing.
And it really kind of made me think, especially with the emphasis put on language, which we can get more into later, kind of made me think of like 1984.
Yeah. I definitely, especially with the first weird word they used, they were talking about new child is the first weird word they were used. And it immediately, my brain was like 1984.
Yeah, no, I had a couple of moments where I thought, this feels very like 1984-esque, but in a fun way. Just in a new and interesting way.
Yeah, I will say, I do notice a theme with dystopian books and their relationship to language.
Yeah, but I do like that this one didn't rely on fear. This is the first dystopian book in a long time that I've read that did not rely on fear and outright control. A lot of the evils of this book are ignorance.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't really a big bad. There isn't someone who's controlling everyone, who's forcing them to do these things.
There's not even like an evil timeline or anything.
It's
like,
just...
The only thing that forces the plot to happen at the pace that it does is the baby Gabe.
Yeah. And even that, it's not done out of malice or evilness. Mm-mm. It's done out of ignorance and not understanding. And I thought it was really fun to read a dystopian book that is essentially created by ignorance but not ruled by fear.
Yeah, it's a lot more philosophical feeling than something like, not that The Hunger Games isn't philosophical.
I love The Hunger Games.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, but it's also a bit more heavy-handed in its dystopia. It doesn't trust its audience quite as much, I feel like.
But I don't even know if it's about trusting the audience. I think most dystopian books are you against the rulers of the society, because that's what we as a society connect with typically the best.
But that's not what this book is.
But that's not what this book is. And I think
not him against anyone.
It's a really good take on it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. It's basically, how did you expect the allegory of the cave to end if you wrote it into a children's dystopian novel? Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I think it's really fun in that aspect to me of a different style of dystopian book, which we don't really get as much anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, I think part of that is kind of this sort of death of science fiction. I don't want to go on too much of a rant, but I don't see a lot of what made science fiction in its heyday or young adult fiction in its heyday happening these days in books. I don't see a lot of like philosophical musing. I don't see a lot of challenging your young audience and expecting them to sort of rise to the occasion of emotional depth.
I do to an extent. I think it depends on what area of that genre you're looking in. Yeah, but I do think this is the first book in a while, and one of the few dystopian books I can remember reading that follows a different path.
Yeah.
And I like that aspect of it. And I think the tone really does a good job of like following that feeling of that naivety of the characters in the community. She does such a good job. We talked about when we read Charlie Bone how she kind of clumsily handled darker themes with a younger audience, and it felt kind of all over the place. But this book did not. I felt that it happened at exactly the right time in the right ways. He was young, and he was experiencing these new heavy concepts for the first time, not just in relation like to him, but the first time in relation to anybody he knew. Like, it wasn't like he understood death from a friend who had a friend who died, or a pet who died.
There was no one to connect through the experience.
No introduction. It's just, hey, death happens and it's real and it's sad and it's painful. And pain happens. And before he does this job, the most painful thing that ever happened to him is he jammed his finger.
Yeah, and he thought like he wasn't going to survive when it happened.
Now, he's experiencing breaking his leg and, like not actually.
Being shot.
They're not just breaking his leg, but his memories, he's experiencing those feelings through those memories. So he is actually feeling the breaking of a leg, being shot, watching your comrade die in battle. And even joy and love, and those are all family. Having to sit down and discuss family with the giver, sitting down and saying, why were those old people there?
That does remind me something I want to bring up, the old people in the memory and the feelings of love. I want to at some point talk about the giver referring to Rosemary as his daughter.
Yes.
When we get through here. But I don't want to forget.
But the tone of the book, she does such a seamless job of transitioning between the naivety of him not understanding to him starting to understand, to him fully comprehending these really heady subjects, to him wanting to help others to understand it better as well. And the loneliness that he feels and being isolated with being the only one who understands all these things.
So how much of the conclusion of the story do you think is prompted by Jonas not wanting to be alone anymore? And how much of it is more prompted by him and the giver knowing that this would be good for the community?
Honestly, I think it's for the good of the community because the giver offers to leave with him, or doesn't offer to leave with him. He wants the giver to leave with him. He's like, please go with me. I don't want to be alone when I leave. And the giver's like, someone has to stay and help the community. And Jonas, while he doesn't want to go alone, is still willing to go alone. And I think that speaks more to his care for the community than his care for himself. Because if it was really about him, he would have stayed.
Maybe. I think Gabe kind of throws a wrench in all of that, though.
True.
And Gabriel is an interesting character in his own right. We never really talked about baby Gabe.
Well, I mean, he doesn't really have a lot of characterization so much as he is important.
Yeah, he's a symbol.
He is a symbol. I mean, he's a symbol of both innocence and of learning, which is interesting. Yeah. Which is kind of what Jonas is, to an extent.
One of the things I wanted to bring up, too, before we move on, is how they categorize age in the book.
Yeah.
You are a year old in December at the sorting ceremony or whatever the heck it's called.
So the idea is you're born throughout the year, but all of the children born between December and December turn 1 year old on December 1st, I think.
I think so. And it's a big holiday when everybody's birthday is.
And when you turn 1, you get a name. And when you turn 8, you get a jacket. And when you turn 9, you get a bike. And each year, you and all of your classmates
gain responsibilities and new accolades. Freedoms. Yeah.
And you all turn the new age on the same day, regardless of how old you are.
Yes. And it's not so much that I want to focus on, I guess, as much as it is because of the way that's structured, people often lose track of how old they even are. Mm-hmm. No one knows how old anyone is. No one knows how long this has been going on, mm-hmm. or if there's anything even outside of this series of communities that are all structured in this very specific way. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me how she uses time in the development of the characters. As far as, like, they have these sort of puberty, like, or adult hallmarks they have to hit. And then
once you're an adult, you're an adult. Yeah. Until you can get married and have kids. And then once your kids grow up, you move away from the community that you're in, the family community part, into the childless adult community. Yeah. And then when you hit, and it's not even a certain age because you don't know how old you are, but when you hit a certain sort of age range, they move you to the house of old where you go to die, essentially. I mean, you don't die immediately. It's like an old folks home. But
you stay there until you are too much of a burden on the state, and then you are released. I'm more interested in how she uses time, not necessarily structurally, but in how she uses it for character development, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, like the idea that Lily gets more freedom when she finally gets a bike.
Exactly.
And how excited she is to get her bike. Like, that's a huge milestone to get your bike because you can go wherever you want.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, you can't really go wherever you want, but you can go wherever you want. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, too, of when you hit 12, you're an adult.
Yep.
You're in training to be an adult. And you still go to school, but you're really going to work and, like, becoming mm-hmm. a grown-up. And you're treated in a lot of ways like a grown-up at this point.
Yeah. You're expected to be a member of the community, a functioning member of the community.
And yeah, I like the idea that no one knows how long this has been going on or how long ago these memories are from.
When Jonas and the giver talk about the time, or what we would call the past, they call it the time before and back and back and back.
And back. Yeah, she definitely utilizes time interestingly and sort of the lack of time. Like
yes.
yeah, we see Jonas. He becomes a 12-year-old. He starts learning to be the receiver of memory. And then a year has passed. And it doesn't necessarily feel like she rushed through that year. It felt natural, but also almost like it didn't matter that it had been a year. Because to an extent, time doesn't matter. And he talks about there's only here and there's only now. Going back to the author, actually, she talks about where that came from. She was talking to her daughter, and she saw on the news that there had been like a shooting. And she started to panic, and she quieted her daughter, and she's like, oh, it wasn't here, and like moved on, and her daughter was like horrified. And she realized in that moment that she said, there is only here and there is only now, and I'm safe here and now. And the like horrific feeling of realizing that she was so callous about such a terrible thing. But she uses that in other ways, such as the passage of time and how Jonas doesn't think about.
I guess that's more where I was getting at. Like, time is something only children think about in this story, I guess, is where I was going.
Yeah.
The lack of time. Time is only important to the community when you're a child as well. Like, your free time and development time, they even thank you for your childhood at the end of it. At the end of being a kid. It's just, I guess that's more where I was going for, is the lack of time is an important part of building the characters.
I agree. I do. I think it's a really interesting stylistic choice.
I agree. It was compelling for sure.
Everything that she does in this book is really compelling to me.
I agree.
Her style is so compelling. Like, the way that she writes is so fluid and so fresh and so vivid and tight.
I guess it's what I liked about it, is her language use is very tight. I can remember, I try to keep track of a bad habit of mine whenever I'm trying to get to the next part of the story, because I'm not really feeling the exposition parts. I will just accidentally glide ahead until I get to plot.
Mm-hmm.
I only did that once in this book for one 3-sentence paragraph. And it was towards the end when I was like really wanting to know. Yeah, I just wanted to know. And that's a really good sign, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, every time she described the environment, it felt pertinent to the plot.
Exactly.
When she described anything that was happening, it felt pertinent to the plot. There was nothing that I felt was a waste of time or space. It's a really short, condensed story.
Exactly.
And in that, and I love condensed styles.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my poetry classes, they were always like, Caleb, say more words. And I was like, no, I can't.
I won't.
The red wheelbarrow is my life. But like, the idea of like this really condensed story, but she still conveys everything that she needs to convey. And that's, she's not all over the place. She's not trying in every which way to get you to get it. She trusts that you'll get it. She says what she needs to say, and she gets
has
there.
An incredibly good economy of words.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's like, the way she uses the words that she chooses in the book, she definitely uses everyone for maximum impact. And that's the mark to me of an extremely talented and experienced writer.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing. And she speaks so well to the age group that she's speaking to. Like, and this is something that I really enjoyed about Harry Potter as well.
Yeah.
The fact that when I read it when I was younger, I understood it and it struck a chord in me. And then when I read it as an adult, I understood it differently and it still struck a chord in me.
Yeah.
And it was universal in that she trusts that her audience will understand it. And she may be writing it geared towards a specific audience, and she does a good job with that. But she does it so well that even as an adult, it's still compelling and evocative language.
Like, I didn't have the existential crisis I probably would have had if I read this as a teenager or like a young person. But I can say that I was extremely impressed with all of her versions of newspeak, basically.
Yeah.
Like, the words that they used and why they used them. I was, like, the way she described, it never occurred to me until she started describing the landscape with color that before the landscape was never described.
Yeah.
Nothing was described except for
what it is.
This is a tunic. This is my hair. This is my sister Lily's ribbons that are never tied right. This is, like, they don't exist outside of their utility.
Yeah. No, and that's what's so fascinating to me. This was the first book I ever read where the concept of color was described.
Yeah.
And she does it so interestingly because it's engaging to the plot. Because you're like, why is it different? What's different about it? And then when you realize it's color, it's like this huge bombshell goes off in your brain of like, oh. But to someone who doesn't know what color is, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the idea that peaks of color will come through and affect you.
That makes me think of Madeleine L'Engle again. I don't mean to keep bringing that series up, but I think I reread that one last year, so it's fairly fresh. In Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time, there is a species of animal or alien that is loving and kind and caring and godly and all of that, but they have no concept of vision because none of them have eyeballs. Mm-hmm. They do, however, have concepts of things like stars and constellations, and it's just interesting in that book to see L'Engle try to describe or have her characters describe sight and not do it, and how differently she does that in that book compared to this. In A Wrinkle in Time, she talks about how hard it is to describe sight. In this book, you get tricky language use to try to have your main character try to describe something they've never experienced before. Mm-hmm. And that's such a tough thing to do anyway as an author and any artist.
She tackles it so well.
So good.
And it's so fascinating because me going back, the first time I read it, I was like so confused. And then going back and reading it, knowing already, just masterfully done. I mean, honestly, it was so well done. And that's not the only thing that she describes for the first time, these heady concepts that he's learning about. A sunburn, sunshine, weather. Like, those are all things that we just know and experience and understand. And he doesn't. And she does such a great job of going through those things and explaining what they are. Even though we, the reader, know, he doesn't. And it helps you to step back and, like, reanalyze the things that you know. And I think that's part of why it's so compelling and so fast-paced feeling, is because it's almost fresh and new to you, the reader.
Exactly. Even as an adult, it was fresh.
Yeah. And I loved that. And
absolutely.
She uses language. She talks about in the book, language is really important. And you can tell that she, the author, also feels that language is really important. And using precise language is important, which I agree. I think it's really important. But she does it so well within the context of the story.
I will say I love, she uses it as part of the plot of the story too, like the precision language use.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really great.
I loved it.
She brought it up over and over again. And that's the only point in the whole story where you're like, oh, the precision use of language is actually debatable.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, in the very first chapter, we're brought forward, he talks about being frightened. He's like, well, I wasn't really frightened. When this happened, I was actually frightened. Right now, I'm more anticipating something. Apprehensive about something. I'm not really afraid.
To find the right words for things. And how difficult, I think it's interesting that he has a difficult time finding the right words for things. Everybody seems to have a difficult time with precision language in this community. To some extent, it's something you have to be trained to do, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I wonder sort of what the background of that was. But his language gets a lot more precise as he experiences pleasure and pain.
Yeah.
And he has more experiences with these emotions. It's an interesting study on the academicness of language versus the real world application of language.
Yes, and I loved that because the idea that hyperbole is sort of against
frowned
the rules.
upon. Yeah,
you don't say you're starving. You've never been starving, and you never will be starving. Is what they told him once when he was very young and said he was starving. But then you want to say I'm hungry. But then his little sister says she's angry. And they continue on in the discussion. And then later he's like, she doesn't even know what anger is.
Exactly.
She was irritated.
But that's the closest thing to anger that these people experience.
Exactly. And so it's so interesting. And then the fact that they use the language of empathy on top of the fact that they don't really have feelings, but they do have a semblance of empathy.
They care.
And they discuss empathy with his little sister in that same situation where she talks about being angry. They discuss, well, when you went somewhere new, you didn't follow you didn't know all their rules and customs, and it made you feel like an outsider. And she's like, yeah. And they're like, well, we feel kind of sorry for this kid that you were angry at because he was somewhere new and he probably felt like an outsider. And she's like, oh yeah, now I feel bad for being angry. And they all kind of move on, and they've just gone through the process of empathy.
Yeah.
And they don't even fully comprehend it. And I love that.
Government mandated empathy training for the people they drain of feelings.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And it comes back to that discussion. Is it a utopia or a dystopia?
Exactly. And she does such a great job of dealing with those dark themes and the ambivalence of utopia or dystopia while still keeping a strong narrative.
Even after reading the book, I'm still not sure which it is, honestly.
I mean,
I don't think it was ever intended to have a hard answer.
I don't think it was a utopia, but I don't necessarily think it was a dystopia either. It definitely had elements that were disturbing.
Yeah, but, so does our society.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of what she was going for is it's not anything. I mean, it is something, but it's not.
This is just one of the many options.
Yeah.
And you have to decide for yourself if this is the option you want. But Jonas realizes that these people can't decide for themselves if that's what they want.
Because they don't know what they're deciding even.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to bring up that she does style-wise is just she subverts certain expectations within the story really well.
Yeah.
She does a good job of, there are definitely tropes in this book. There are going to be tropes in any book. But like we discussed in our first episode, sometimes tropes can be really useful.
Absolutely.
And she uses her tropes really well.
Mm-hmm.
She uses them for a reason. They're not just there out of a laziness of writing or I just need this thing. It's, this is important to the story and here is why.
For example, a trope we'll bring up again when we discuss our tropes. There's the example of adults choose your life at age ? Which is a common YA trope that we decided to put on our list. And this is the only one I can think of where it's important to both, I guess you could say City of Ember, it's important to both the plot and to the setting.
But in the City of Ember, it's lottery style. There is no, you don't choose, you don't get chosen. It's only
important to the plot by chance.
Yes.
In this story, adults choose your life at age yada yada is important to the plot because it's reinforcing our themes. It's part of what gives each of these characters their growth. It's part of what sets the scene for this community.
And it's not just arbitrary, you get this thing. It's, we've been studying you and your aptitudes and what you enjoy and the things that you seem interested in, and we think this will be a good fit for you. And you can appeal it. It may never go anywhere, but you can appeal it. And she does a good job of sort of subverting your expectations with, at 12 years old, I get my job, and that's what it is forever.
Yeah.
It's still that, but she does so much more with it.
She definitely takes it in a much more interesting direction.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Not trying to throw shade on City of Ember.
No, I like City of Ember.
Any other story that uses this trope. It's just, there are ways to use tropes that are fun, and then there are ways to use tropes that are a bit more academic. And this is a lot more academic, in my opinion.
I agree.
So I also wanted to bring up the symbolism of the color red in this book, because it's used, from my estimation, in every important moment in the story.
Yes.
The color red is described in every moment of the story where we see conflict for Jonas that I've noticed.
I can see that, yeah. No, I think that's fair. I was going to say more as a running through line of like life and death, but
yeah, also that and that's one of the major symbols too that they cover a lot. You see juxtaposed, Jonas volunteers at the House of the Old with Fiona, but he also spends a lot of time with his dad around the babies. And so there's a lot of discussion around being old and being young and how it's similar and different in birth and death, and how they're all kind of wrapped up together. And it doesn't come to any conclusions about that. But even
in his memories of seeing an elephant being killed, which made me think of that short story of, what is that called? I don't even remember. But
Hills Like White Elephants?
Yes. It made me think of that. And it was so well done of him not even understanding at first what was happening, but seeing red in a different context for the first time was really interesting. And it comes up multiple times as well.
His understanding of red as a color deepens as his ability to see it deepens. And its symbolic worth in the story deepens both for the character and for us as an audience member. And I really enjoyed that. That was
not just red, but color in general.
Absolutely.
Like, because yes, red is the through line color, but the idea of colors coming into clarity as understanding comes into clarity.
As wisdom specifically is the word they used.
As he wisens up, if you will, as he comes to experience more things and understand more things, he also begins to see more color both in his daily life and in the memories. And I think that the use of color as a symbol of understanding was really interesting to me. And then, of course, Gabe, the baby.
Yes. Baby Gabe, who is the symbol of growth, an opportunity for growth.
Yeah,
I would argue.
I think Gabe is...
unless you read that differently.
I think he was an opportunity for growth as well as sort of a symbol of how the society is broken and how its need to include everyone the same way is detrimental to some. Because Gabe is a healthy baby otherwise. Yeah, he just doesn't sleep all through the night like he's supposed to. Yeah. That's literally the only problem with him. And the idea that when Jonas gives him some memories, he does sleep all through the night kind of makes you wonder if the reason he's not sleeping through the night is because maybe he is feeling or seeing beyond. And that's keeping him up. And they're essentially quenching that out because it's different. And the idea that being different, being quenched out isn't necessarily a good thing. Lastly, I want to discuss the ending of the book because it kind of deserves its own section here. So the book ends very ambiguously. In the beginning of the book, Jonas is given a memory of snow and sledding and fun, and he's later given a similar memory of sledding in the snow where he breaks his leg, and it's horrifying. And then lastly, he's also given a memory of a house where Christmas is going on inside and familial bonds is strong. Like, they're strong. And that's another thing we'll need to talk about is family as a symbol in the story. In the end of the book, Jonas and Gabe have run away from their community. They're starving to death. They've been walking for months, and they're freezing, and it's snowing. And Jonas gets to the top of this hill that is probably implied to be a mountain. And he sees a sled, and then towards the end of the mountain, going downhill on the mountain, he sees a house with bright lights, and it looks warm, and he grabs Gabe and gives him the last happy memory he has access to, and they take the sled down towards the house like they are an Ethan Frome. And that's the end of the book. Well, I can't talk about Ethan Frome. I can't talk about Ethan Frome. We can't talk about Ethan Frome. I can't. I know. I have to gloss over that comment because I can't start. But that's literally what it made me think of. We've already been talking so long, and if I start talking about Ethan Frome, I won't stop. So I'm going to go back and talk about the whole implication in the book is you don't know if the sled is really there, if the house is really there, if they're really sledding to safety, because he's sort of losing consciousness at this point, or if they're going to freeze to death on top of this mountain, or what is happening. It's sort of ambivalent in that this could mean anything. You mean ambiguous? What did I say? Ambivalent. It's sort of ambiguous in that this could mean anything. And when I was younger and I read this book, I read the book, came away feeling like Jonas and Gabe lived and they found this house. And in my mind, the idea of time was that who knew how long it had been, and it's the same family living in this house. Yeah. That they've always been here. And that it wasn't that long ago. And that's what I really thought when I was younger. And now when I was older and I went back and read it, and it's been years and years and years, I thought, oh, he definitely died. Yeah, for sure. and so it's interesting that the reading takeaway that I got when I was younger changed when I was older, and both still worked. Yeah. I definitely, I don't always love an ambiguous ending, but I think it really works for this story because while I read it also as him dying, and you also mentioned an alternate interpretation that I also thought of, which is the idea that he made it all the way back around the world to his community. And it was different. Those seem more likely to me than him just straight living, but there's enough room for any interpretation. I will say in the death ending defense, however, the word, we talked about some of the newspeaky words that get brought up in the book, and one of the words that stands out the most to me is the word elsewhere, which is always capitalized, of course, because it's not newspeak.
elsewhere is anywhere that is not in the communities. And it's a place, certainly, definitely a place. And elsewhere is where people go. Elsewhere is discussed as a place where people go when they're released throughout the book. It is also discussed as though it's La La Land or Fantasyland, the idea that anything outside of the community doesn't exist. And part of that is because of the sort of groupthink of the community. They're very insular and they're not very curious. And part of that, I think, comes from not having language for stuff that isn't in the here and now. Mm-hmm. But elsewhere is definitely used as a euphemism for death throughout the book. She explicitly says that Jonas has found elsewhere when he's going down the hill with Gabe. So to me, that reads very specifically of death. But there are other, like talking about the hearing music for the first time is a very biblical feeling to me. And talking about, the echoes from behind him was a really interesting element. So it's ambiguous, but I think I fall on the side of he died if this book was standalone.
Okay. I'm an optimist, so I think even if that is kind of where she was, because they call it elsewhere when he's leaving. I do think it's definitely used as a euphemism for death multiple times, but they do call it elsewhere when he's planning to leave too, which is why I made that delineation from the elsewhere that is death. But yeah, I think.
But the elsewhere he's going to isn't really defined. Yeah. At that point, he just wants it to be something that isn't death, I think.
Yeah. Well, and the sled is sort of a symbol of
choice,
and they talk about what if you make the wrong choice, and we've seen two options of sledding going well and sledding going badly, and him finding the sled is sort of a choice of, do you want to take a leap of faith?
Yeah,
and he does, and I think that's really the main point of the ending.
I do enjoy, and I agree with you. I don't think the point of the ending is how it ended. I think it's trying to make a broader point about the overall themes of the book, which is, what a good ending should be.
Yeah, and I don't always love an ambiguous ending. However, I thought it was really well executed.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So just a few stray tidbits here. I am really interested, this is sort of two related things. I'm really interested in how family is used as a symbol in the story, or like a family unit is used. Lowry sort of touches on what makes a family in the story, because what makes a family in unit within the community is different than what Jonas sees in some of the memories and experiences love through.
They're not really familial bonds. They're more like job bonds, like associates.
Well, I mean, I would say there's definitely a lot. The characters are definitely closer than that.
Well, yeah.
And I would definitely want to posit that if Jonas's father and mother had access to memories and pain and wisdom, that they would reevaluate how they express love to him. I definitely, it feels like a home full of love. It doesn't feel clinical. It doesn't feel,
they care about one another.
They do. These people care about each other and they want the best for each other. And it feels very warm, even towards the end when it's a little sad and scary. Like, these people definitely care about each other.
But in that, familial bonds in a unit in the community are not meant to be extended. No. They're not meant to last longer than a child finishing training. Once he finishes training, he will move out and he won't see his parents
probably ever again.
Probably ever. Except for maybe to watch his sister graduate. But it doesn't even really say for sure if that will happen. But once they both graduate, his parents will move off and he won't even know when they die.
No.
Are released. Like, he won't know. Essentially, it's stated in the book like that.
And it never occurred to him that he should care until he had those memories.
Yeah.
And that's just mind-blowing to me.
And in that, the giver's relationship to Rosemary, who he thinks of as a daughter.
Exactly. Well, that's the next thing I wanted to bring up in relationship to family as symbolism. There is a lot of discussion throughout the book that maybe all of the children who have pale eyes and the potential for release, or not really, for the potential to be a receiver, that all of these children may in fact be related to each other, like biologically. Potentially. And there's also the implication that the giver might be the parent of all of them, in my opinion.
I definitely wonder.
They never talk about how fathers happen in this book, so.
Yeah. Well, and they did actually say at one point, like, he said, my daughter, and he says her name, and he's just kind of like, oh, like, the idea is, does he think of her as a daughter, or is she legitimately
his daughter,
biological child?
Or, on top of that, he was assigned a wife. He had a family at some point. He helped to raise. Was Rosemary maybe
one of his children?
One of the children he was assigned to raise.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different ways that could go, and it can mean so many different things, and it's never really addressed, but it is still framed as very wonder. Powerful.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder too, like, it makes you wonder with Gabe and Jonas, you know, a child being around a giver growing up, would that make them more inclined to be a receiver of memory when they get older, which could make sense if Rosemary was his actual daughter. Not that it's necessarily important.
Or if there's some sort of genetic predisposition to being a receiver of memory. And I get the impression, there's an implication in the story to me that there is, well, what I was going to say is there's an implication in the story to me that the elders are the ones doing the fertilizing of the babies. I don't know how they would choose fertilizing the birth mothers. That's never discussed in the book.
It is never discussed.
And I need to know.
Well,
I don't know why.
It could be, you know, insemination. It could be all kinds of
obviously
things.
It's insemination. And I know it's discussed in the sequel to this book, but I haven't read that. Yeah. So
and I would love to read it.
And I think we should approach it like this book was its own book for a long time. So we have to approach it from its own piece.
Yes.
And on its own, no one discusses where dads come from. Like, I want to know where the semen comes from. Tell me, how do you pick?
But I think, the idea of kind of chosen family versus genetic family to an extent.
Pick from the general population pool either, though. Yeah. Because everybody's
related.
Well, no, everybody's on suppressants.
That too.
They can't physically have sex or have those feelings of arousal. So it just
makes you wonder.
It does make you wonder where all these babies are coming from, other than the birth mother. So there's an element of that I think is interesting, and it's discussed throughout the book that it's weird that these rare children have pale eyes, which are later blue eyes.
Yeah, and most of those children are predisposed to be receivers of memory. Mm-hmm. The only other child that has light eyes, as they're called at the beginning, that Jonas mentions again later with the giver as being a potential receiver of memory, and the giver is like, yeah, I've had an eye on her. And the idea is, if you have blue eyes or light eyes, you are predisposed to being a good receiver of memory. And I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah. My argument is that it's probably a genetic thing, and the implication is that Rosemary and Jonas are the biological children of the giver.
It's definitely possible, and it would be an interesting...
Because he says, I loved her, and I love you too. And it's just sort of, I don't know. And I don't want to take away from his relationship with Jonas aside from that either, because he definitely loves Jonas. Regardless. I'm curious and I want to know the answers. So I guess we're going to have to do Son at some point.
Yeah. Or even just on our own time.
Did you have any other thoughts?
The only other kind of things that I wanted to make sure that I said were that I think this book does a good job of making its readers think and evaluate their own desire for comfort, for safety, and for sameness. Because to an extent, that's alluring to me even after reading this book. The book
didn't necessarily make it uncompelling.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad and aspects of it are bad, but aspects of it, and they even say this in the book, are good.
And aspects of the society we have now are bad and good. It's just more of an extreme dichotomy. Like, you have these sort of polar opposite ends of, in a world where you have these emotions, you have extreme good and extreme bad versus a world where everything's just pretty all right and no one suffers and everything's pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's not treated as some sort of like weird communist dystopia.
Yeah.
It's just treated as an alternative option.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of breaks my brain as an adult. So I'm sure it's hard on kids.
I loved it as a kid. It definitely made me think. And that's what you want out of a book like this, especially a book aimed towards young minds that are learning concepts of community.
Yeah.
And this, I think
like
this
how
book,
much do you owe the community you're from? And is it better to serve your community as an individual and to stand out and do things that are difficult? Or is it better to benefit your community by being part of it?
Yeah, it was well served for its audience, I think. And I think that's really the last thing that I have to say about it is overall, it was just
such a good book. Oh my God. Okay. Now it's time for the tropes count.
So some of the tropes that we found in this book are adults decide your life at age
whatever.
but it's 12. A mentor character, which is pretty common in YA literature. I'm not like the other girls, just because he was kind of an outsider and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I can
and
see that
he's different than everybody else.
He is different.
Puberty symbolism. There was some puberty symbolism. And then the one that I wrote down, there was almost a mirror description, but then it swerves. Like, he starts to go like he's going to describe himself in the mirror, and I like got all geared up and ready for it, and then he was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I don't really like to look at myself in the mirror. And we moved on.
It was great.
It was awesome.
It was a good moment.
So I wrote it down.
Lamp person. That was another one. A lamp person, as we define it, is a person who could be replaced with a lamp, and it wouldn't affect the plot much.
Would that be Fiona?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure, Fiona.
I mean, I liked her, but yeah.
She felt like, here's the thing, you can have a completely well-written, like, rounded character.
And they can still be a lamp person.
And they can still be a lamp person because they're not useful to the plot necessarily. And she wasn't really in her own right. She wasn't useful to the plot through any fault of her own. She was useful to the plot because Jonas had a big dumb crush on her.
Yeah. So, what did you give this on literary merit?
I gave it a 4.5.
We gave it a 4.7.
Yeah. Probably one of the higher scores I'm going to give a book this season.
Yeah, I gave really high scores for this book. I didn't give a 5 for anything because I'm pretty careful about high scores, but
yeah, it wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
There were definitely parts of it, like, obviously no one's going to write a perfect book, but there were parts of it that I was like, well, that probably could have used a bit more editing, or that, just little things like that I think kind of knock it out of, perfect score territory. And I can think of a couple of YA books I would give this score. Like, I definitely judge on a curve for YA.
Yeah.
But I still wouldn't give it quite a perfect
I don't judge on a curve for YA. I think
I do. I judge on a curve for any genre, I think, because because
the way it's written. Okay,
yeah.
I see what I thought you meant on a curve like it's worse, and I was like, it's not worse.
No, it's just so different than what people would traditionally associate with academic study.
Right. That you have to kind of take that into account.
Exactly.
Right. So what did you give it on entertainment factor?
Oh, I gave it a 4.
You gave it a 4.5 because even though I read it before, I still had trouble. I was sneaking it at work. I was reading.
Yes, I definitely, I'm not going to say that I read it at work because I would never do something like that. But
but if you did.
But if I had. No, I definitely found myself wanting to read it and looking forward to reading it when I had free time.
And it's very compelling.
It's a quick read. Mm-hmm. So if you, like you said, if you've got a spare 5 hours to throw around throughout the week, it's just like really easy to jump into and like dig in.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate, but I will also say there were parts of the book that were less than fun.
Yeah.
Not that they weren't enjoyable completely, but they were definitely parts that felt I enjoyed more academically than reading it. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the difference between like an art movie and a shoot 'em up. I like both of those things.
They're entertaining for different reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then overall opinion.
Overall, I gave it a 4.5.
I gave it a 4.8.
Dang, son.
I really regard this book highly.
Yeah, no kidding.
So all of those together give us the score.
Drum roll of 4.5.
Of a 4.5, which is on our scale of whether or not you should read a book. It's pretty high up there. Anything over a 3.5 we think is worth a revisit.
I would say this is a must read of the genre.
Yeah, it's
honestly. It's up there with like Harry Potter and...
Well, it's considered a classic for a reason.
Absolutely. Like, you read it in school, I'm sure.
No, I read it on my own.
Oh, that surprises me.
Why?
Because our school made us read a lot of books.
They did, but they did not make us read the
and they especially really focused us on banned books, I remember, when we were in school. Because that was coming into vogue, and all of our teachers were real into that. So we both read a lot of banned books in our literature classes. But I don't ever remember being made to read this book, which I think is strange now that I'm older.
Because it's worth a read.
It's really worth a read. I think it should be, like, obviously alongside, like, Aldous Huxley books for kids and Ray Bradbury and stuff, like those books that break your brain while you're in high school, while it's still safe to have a dumb brain because you don't have bills yet. So
yeah, this is, if you are considering reading one of the books on this list, this is highly regarded. I would say at the end of the season, we'll kind of do a breakdown of what ones I think you should definitely read, and this will 100% be on it, because it is so well done.
My brain feels smarter now that I read it.
Yeah.
Which, I can't always say about YA fiction. I'm not trying to throw shade on Twilight, but I didn't feel smarter after I read it.
I think that's kind of a back end to YA fiction. I think there's lots of YA fiction that you can read and feel smarter. But there is some that's really tropey and doesn't make you feel smarter. This one definitely makes you think, and it does it in such a compelling and interesting way that you don't feel like it's so boxy. Or I didn't. So yeah, definitely give this one a read if you're interested.
Give it a shot.
If you're interested in the book that we're reading next, check us out on social media. All of our social media is in the links on our page, which will be linked. And check it out and see if you can guess the next book that we're doing, because we are dropping clues throughout the week and engaging with you guys. Ask us any questions that you have or any other books you might be interested in us reading.
We're still building our next season's list.
Yeah.
It's a little late to put a book on this season just because we both have day jobs and we have to plan our book reading ahead of time.
But in terms of if you're interested in hearing us talk about a book, let us know and we'll definitely consider it. And even if it's not a YA book, we're thinking at some point we may do some
special episodes.
Yeah. So let us know what you think. Check us out on social media. Share this with your friends if you think they'll be interested. I'm Kayla.
I'm Jessica. And this is the YA Sisterhood.